Good morning, everybody, and to some of our guests, good evening. So welcome. We're going to be having a discussion on thought leadership in public procurement. And really, this is something that was floated a couple of weeks ago. There was some discussion around best practices and should we have a best practice discussion or thought leadership discussion? And anyway, centered on the idea of thought leadership. And we're really pleased that we've got a number of people that are with us today. Prof Geo Quinot will be joining us later. He has said he's got another commitment, but will join us. We're going to have Ron Grace, Head of SEM at the National Research Foundation. We'll kick off with an announcement and a bit of a presentation as well. Professor Barbara Allan, Associate Professor at Wellington School of Business and Government in New Zealand. Welcome, Barbara. Ronald Mlalazi, Managing Director of CommerceF South Africa, and then Prof Geo Quinot, all the way from Stellenbosch, will be joining us as well. So we're going to ask each of these folk. I've given them a little bit of a time slot each, and a challenge always for us to try and keep within that time frame. And then we'll open up towards the back end any questions that you might have. I'm going to be making some notes as we go of questions that I've got, but please be sure to take some notes. You're welcome to include comments in the chat as we go, and we'll certainly give us an ability to pick those up towards the back end there. So welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for turning your cameras on. It's a terrible habit we have in South Africa that we don't turn cameras on. Ron, you're welcome to share from your side. If you're able to put it on the little slideshow mode, that will be good. Okay, so it's going to be a little bit small then. There, perfect, Ron. Perfect. Thanks very much, Ron, and looking forward to sharing some thoughts. And I believe you're also going to make an announcement as well. So over to you.
Okay. So, Sean, thank you very much for the idea of having this session on thought leadership and for to present. And so today I'm really presenting on two aspects. The one is just some initial thoughts on thought leadership. The second one is on a particular thought leadership concept, which will be a separate presentation, and that's on competence centers. So I'm going to be very brief, so we can pick up any questions in the question time. So thought leadership is an aspiration of the NRF generally, and we in the procurement section have caught the bug. So it's part of who we are. And when we inducted our board members recently, one of them asked, why does the procurement section, aspire to be, thought leaders, or are they actually thought leaders? Got our thought processes going, and at a recent forum, provide some brief thoughts to our practitioners on what is thought. And of course, most of us think of geniuses, people like Einstein or Elon Musk. Those are thought leaders. They are geniuses. Or in a research context, we think of the NRF's A-rated researchers, where you are an acknowledged leader in your field internationally in research. There's another area in practice. So you may be a leading expert in practice. The one that we would probably lean on more is just being an expert. So if you look at the dictionary definitions, it really revolves around some sort of expertise or expert. I'm not going to waste your time with a weak joke. And of course, an expert is either an expert or a leading expert. So in the NRF context, we may or may not be a expert. We don't claim to be the expert. It may be academic or practical. In certain instances, it may be realized, it may be concrete, it may even just be perceived, or even aspirational. So why is it relevant to the NRF? Well, because our role includes that of the national system of innovation, we actually have a duty not just to do our own, take care of our own innovation, but the entire system of innovation in the country. And we're having a conference in March, a seminal conference led by our minister in that respect. So in terms of our aspirations, we clearly, as an organization, seek to be a city on the hill. We've always aspired to thought leadership. Practically, do we have some expertise? We've tried and failed a lot of things. I won't go into those, but we arguably do have a niche in the procurement of innovation. We have a niche in contributing to a seminal guideline on methods, and we also have been the catalyst for international conferences and contributing to the research agenda. So that's in terms of whether these sorts are credible or not. And I see a number of the speakers are going to be addressing this. Now, just bear with me. I'm just trying to close this presentation and then open the second one. Am I sticking to my 5 minutes, Sean?
Doing very well, Ron.
Okay. I say that because the second presentation is a little bit longer, but I'm going to try and stick to 5 minutes. Again, I'll just go there and then go into presentation. Okay, so if we look at thought leadership, and we look in the procurement space and we say, what is one of the leading practices internationally? It is the establishment of procurement of innovation competence centers. I'll just briefly go through the history of that concept in South Africa. I'm just going to go through some key questions. So it's practiced in a number of developing countries in the world. It begs the question, why is not practiced here? We did propose such a competence center conference. And we as an organization are fully in support of initiating a competence center, if nobody else will, at least in the immediate short term. And the reason is that we have very valuable experience. We have things to contribute, not only to the country, but to the world in being innovative, in putting together the largest research infrastructure project and succeeded in a spectacular scientific success. So we've got know-how to share, our leisures of international stuff. So when we look at competence centers, what are these things? And here's a graph from a study done in Europe from a number of countries, and it's almost like a maturity model. But if you look at it, and so if we look at the African environment, as the NRF to take on, be a lead partner, a middle partner in getting a center going. So in the first year, we'd like to establish the center. And then, Sean, you spoke about a very important announcement. This is the first time we are saying this publicly, that our international conference next year, more or less around September, will be on the theme of best practices. And we're also looking at putting together a book-length guideline on best practices, and I'll give you a later slide. And then, of course, there is a framework pilot project that we will do in the first year. Pilot phase, we'll continue rolling out within the national system of innovation, and then even if and all the other ones, we'll look at more in terms of beyond the pilot phase. It depends very much on funding. So who's involved? So I call these founding members, and Sean and Henry, that includes Will. You've been very integral to the planning and thinking here. Geo Quinot, who'll join us later, has been very involved. We've had discussion, Ronald, on the for Commerce Edge to be involved, and we have indicated a sort of interest. We are in discussions with National Treasury, and we'll be hopefully having a meeting with them once we've put a position paper together. And of course, anybody else is welcome to join this particular initiative. Now, how big are these things? Are they massive? Are they small? And the one guideline we get from the EU is they're not that big. I think in a developed country situation, there are around four full-time staff members. And they've got budgets in EU terms, but they're not that big relative to sort of other initiatives and other centers. So funding. How does one fund a new initiative like this? So the NRF have formally adopted the idea of having a competence center. See ourselves in a transitional role until it takes ownership. Of course, we've spoken about our founding members who have been very much involved. And of course, going forward, we've spoken about please speak to us. So when we'd like to start, it's just a month and a half. Pilot phase, and of course, beyond 3 years, we'd have to look at funding arrangements. The name. Procurement of Innovation Competence Center. Whoops. But in South Africa, we are thinking of actually calling it a thought leadership sort of initiative. So there's 3 thought leadership titles, and again, this will evolve, and we'll see what happens over time. And the nice thing is there are guidelines in the EU, step-by-steps on how to set these up. So that's nice. And of course, we can go and visit other competence centers and see how they do it. So just to emphasize that this is this session may be interested in providers and others, those listening on the platform, or if you're aware of others. But just to give you an idea that we are planning 2 different bid invitations. Organizer, And secondly, is we are keen on putting together a book length guideline. We have already commissioned two on methods, the other one on specifications. So this will be the third in the series. And I think I'm close to the end. I am. So thank you.
Fantastic, Ron.
And I look forward to your contributions and thoughts at the end. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Just Ron's, your sound was very poor at some points, but fortunately you did have the presentation with the words on it, so I didn't interrupt you, and I believe the recording will pick that up. But just to be sure, Ron, so you've mentioned a conference. Just to confirm, will that be this year around September? You mentioned next year. I just wanted to be sure which year.
Calendar year. Sorry,
this calendar year.
Sector, we have financial years.
Got you.
So
got
from
you.
the 1st of April, it's a new financial year. So this calendar year, more or less around September, when we normally have the conference.
Okay, good, yes. Good. And then the center is not for the NRF. It's established by the NRF, but will be for the broader public procurement community. Is that right? So
the intention is that it becomes an international center, because it's not just South Africa, but right. Africa, maybe the Southern Hemisphere. So the idea is it will be an international center, but initially, because the NRF may be a lead funder, that we will continue with NRF thought leadership sort of initiatives, and then translate those into case studies and guidelines that will be available publicly.
Got you. Thanks, Ron. We're going to move straight on then to Professor Barbara Allan. Welcome, Barbara, all the way from Wellington, New Zealand. Very pleased that you're joining us. For those who don't know Barbara has got a global perspective. She has worked in North America, Canada, if I'm not mistaken, in Europe, and is now based in Australasia. So she really has quite a global perspective. And she also has spent some time in South Africa as well, 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, probably. So thank you, Barbara. Welcome. Looking forward to some of your thoughts.
Thank you, Sean. It's lovely to be here. Shall I try to share?
You're welcome to, yes.
If it works. Okay.
There we are. It's coming through. There we are. Nice picture of Wellington.
Yeah, that was the idea anyway.
We have a town in Wellington just out in the Cape Province, and that doesn't look like the same Wellington. So
let me see if I can get it going.
There we go. Full screen.
Yes.
Over to you.
Lovely to be here, Sean. Thank you so much. Very exciting times to do with public procurement. I just thought I'd show you a picture of Wellington, which is where I'm based. And our university is in the sort of far right corner there. That's the downtown. It's quite small. You can walk across it, but quite an interesting place to be. Just happy to be with you tonight. Well, it's tonight for me. And I'll move right on. Sean asked me to talk about thought leadership. I thought, what an interesting topic. How do we talk about thought leadership? So for me, I thought, oh my goodness, I remember a slide that I've used a couple of times along the way. And I thought, isn't this really what we all want, right? Everybody to know procurement, for it to be something that people aspire to, that people know about and want to do it. And I think as thought leaders, we need certainly to be thinking about engaging youth. One of my most important things I do is teach strategic procurement and engage with students at various levels. I think exposing people to ideas and possibilities that can occur with government buying and the complex relationships around supply management and supply chain, when we do them well, the possibilities are incredible. When we're talking about innovation, those of us in the know, right, that innovation is a key part of what we can do with procurement. So very interesting times ahead. For me, I started as a Canadian Air Force officer, and sure, I marched around a bit, That's me in the right hand there early on. And trained as an air movement officer. That's not me back in the days when we didn't take pictures all the time, but it's essentially what I did as air movements. And yeah, I did all that. But I think what was most important is we learned to think, to question, to act ethically, and to lead well. So to me, thought leadership is leader. And then what is this thing about thought leadership? I think it's really important to be understanding the doing of it, to be understanding the action of it, and being authentic in that. I don't think, is maybe a question for us to discuss. Is thought leadership separate from leadership, right? So just something to sort of spur us on a little bit in our discussions. Of course, as I went on along the way, the vast range of everything that happens in procurement, and this is just sort of to get us thinking about, let's not forget about services and all the vast range of things that we do in procurement, supporting our society, supporting people along the way, care, all of that, from aircraft to services for the elderly, from pens to, everything. And innovation through procurement really needs to be everywhere. So that got me to thinking again. Thank you, Sean, for really sort of sparking some thoughts that I had. I looked up, what is this thing, thought leadership? Pretty much most of the ideas that come up have something to do with what's on the right-hand side of the screen there. Deep expertise, strong communication, interesting perspectives, impactful ideas, and forward thinking. Pretty much everything you see has something to do with that. I looked it up and I thought, is this an academic field, thought leadership? And it's not really, which is interesting in and of itself. Not a problem, just something also for us to maybe be curious about. But for me, I think thought leadership has to, in our field, in procurement and supply chain that we're talking about, I think disciplinarity is very, very important. And to me, that means bringing together all the different fields, everything from science to environment, history, philosophy, ethics, public policy, law. Now, we all can't be experts in everything, obviously, but I think in terms of thought leadership, being able to build the bridges across these areas is really important. That's what I've seen over many, many years in this field now. Starting to see procurement being recognized properly academically, but it has taken a long time. Supply chain's been there for a long time, but I think because this procurement does something more, and we've got to build those bridges across disciplines, and we're starting to do that more and more. I think there's also an interesting term called boundary spanners. So working at the edges of things, edges of ideas, edges of fields, and trying to bring those together and link up things that might not have been done before. And that really feeds into the idea of innovation, doesn't it? Taking things you might not have heard before, or maybe an idea or a practice or a theory from an unusual field, and bringing it into our area and thinking about, can we use that in some way? And I think that's where we can get some unique things happening. And also, I think we need to be navigators. So finding paths, finding routes. One of those has been about the procurement profession. I think we'll be talking a bit more about that. How do we do that across disciplines, across different industries, across public, private, voluntary sector? I'll come back to that in a minute. So I think those for me are some pretty important elements. Sort of the second grouping there is the global idea. And that's not to say that, everybody has to be globetrotting all the time. That's obviously not very sound for the environment, but a global perspective. And I like to think of things in a macro, meso, and micro way. That comes from my public policy study. So macro, the trade elements, where procurement shows up in trade agreements is really, really important. And that affects competition and how we structure our tenders and procurements within the country. For me, at a meso level, that sort of organizational level can be departments. It can be the relationships between the big industries and the different organizations in the public sector, for example. And then the micro level, really, individuals, how we operate in organizations, how we connect across as individuals, and there's lots of increasingly more ways to do that as individuals in our field. So that adds to our ability to contribute to thought leadership, perhaps be a thought leader. Yeah, I'm slightly uncomfortable with the word thought leadership, but it's growing on me a little bit. And I mentioned this notion of across public, private, voluntary and community sectors, and being able to think really holistically about what we're doing. Government buying in other organizations as well is a critical activity. We know that it's a strategic lever, and I think courage to tell it like it is. And for me, that's empowering others to talk about buying, to talk about the role it plays in organizations, to say to politicians, whoever it may be, maybe it's just your colleague, you know, this is a really, really critical activity, and we don't always talk about it at the right level. So there's that. I won't go into this in detail. You will be very familiar with these kinds of ideas, probably the notion of procurement and procurement policy and activity as a lever. We know that for innovation, there's all sorts of things even within the procurement rules, within the procurement regulation and law that can be done, and we can't continue to really think about procurement as a drain or a constraint. Those constraints are there for very good reasons, right? For efficient and effective use of public funds. We know that we have to do it well and do it better, working towards less corruption. It varies across the world, of course, in ways and means to do that. In New Zealand, we've been working very hard at conflicts of interest and how to manage that in a small society. So there's all these different areas that we need to sort of keep in mind. I think that interdisciplinarity is reflected really well in these areas. And if we can bring our minds to that and just constantly talking about it and educating people about this area, because once you do, they go, oh, right, it really is that important. And I put at the top there because of the times that we're in, protect democracy and our societies. I mean, we have a role in that. We know how to protect the public purse, but also to do interesting things, to do new things, to do the right things. And we've got to keep going at that. So I think that's all I have. Thank you very much. Ngā mihi, which is Māori, and digging into my French-Canadian language there, merci beaucoup. So I hope that I hit the timing just about right.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Barbara. I'm going to ask Ronald to come in, and fascinating thoughts there. Would you be willing to share that presentation with those who are online today?
Yes, sure. Yeah.
Got some great thoughts there, so thank you for that. Welcome, Ronald. I don't know if you've got any slides, Ronald. You're welcome to share those. I'm just before I move on to Ronald, I'm just going to ask Barbara. If you could in the chat, Barbara, just jot down some thought leaders in public procurement that you are aware of.
I forgot to talk about that.
Globally,
yeah, sure,
globally. Just dump a couple of thoughts into the chat would be great. Thank you very much. Thank you. Welcome, Ronald. Ronald heads up Commerce Edge South Africa, and he is well known to many of us, and I've asked him to come in and talk about thought leadership in public procurement, but also to give us a bit more of a perspective of Africa. He's very involved in Africa, but also in terms of the role, if any, of a professional body. Go ahead, Ronald.
Thanks, Sean, and good morning to your colleagues, and good evening to Dr. Barbara. Thank you so much for giving that insight. I'll go straight into the topics. I'll cover the following areas: thought leadership in public procurement, the role of professional bodies in thought leadership, education, training, and development in thought leadership, absorption, and then thought leadership in South Africa and Africa. Now, just to set the scene, what we should be, we should be seen as informed, meaning we know exactly what we're talking about, and we should be relevant. impacting the economies, impacting the societies, so should be relevant and also should be authentic. Now, to me, these are critical points of reference when talking about thought leadership. Institutions, individuals, and organizations must come to this forum and say, okay, right, we have a situation, how can you help? Now, as part of getting to those three terms, informed, relevant, and authentic, I then try to look at what is happening around us as thought leadership in procurement in particular. There is no one size fit all in terms of thought leadership. But I tried to focus on one particular area. In this case, how does procurement become relevant in the societies in which we live in? We just had the Public Procurement Act signed by the president last year. But in that Procurement Act, there are specific areas that I wanted us to look at that will then kickstart the concept of thought leadership. Section 21 and Section 22 of the Public Procurement Act, they are very direct in terms of what is expected. If I may read Section 21, it says a procuring institution may, in accordance with prescribed conditions, provide for measures to advance sustainable development in procurement. From a thought leadership perspective, the question is, how do we make this a reality? Second aspect, which is key to me, is measures for beneficiation and innovation, advancing creation of jobs. Now, we have often come across this term beneficiation in the mining industry. But what does it mean now that it is in the Public Procurement Act? So the thought leadership, in my view, needs now to start articulating these aspects. But over and above that, looking at how do we respond to global, regional, and national questions, and how are these impacting on supply chains, and more so in the public sector space. I'm not sure how many of us are aware that today, this afternoon, the Minister of Finance is going to be sharing the national budget. Now, where is procurement, particularly public procurement, to debate on that budget statement? Which are those elements that we are saying we need to focus on? And in the process of doing that, we are shaping and influencing policy. But it becomes difficult to influence if we are not relevant, if we are not informed, and if we are not authentic. Therefore, the competency levels, they become so critical. In the same act, we talk about innovation. How do you innovate? What is innovation if you cannot critique, if you cannot ask difficult questions? So the thought leadership, in my view, needs to focus on some of those aspects and also become a government policy sounding board. They come to the thought leadership. What should we do? Does this make sense? And in the process of doing that, then we play the advocacy role. But above all, the most important of these aspects is being the voice, freezing for the profession, but also creating a platform where we support what we call data-driven decision-making mechanisms at government at different levels, but also even using other institutions. So data then becomes the underpinning aspect of thought leadership. Hence, I spoke about informed, relevant, and authentic. But now coming to the role of professional bodies in thought leadership, my view there was the professional bodies have a strategic role in shaping thought leadership conversations. And how will this happen? The professional body, generally, they contribute to knowledge development, but they may also contribute in terms of sharing information on national topics. So we need to find out which are these national topics and which are those elements that if we interrogate them, then we can actually help to drive policy. And also lobbying the decision makers for creating standards and best practices. Ron, he made reference to that. Then I'm saying we need to have this forum and be a trusted forum, okay? And we lobby, and then we create these best practices that will then lead to informed decisions by the policymakers. But it's also critical in terms of creating and upholding community of practice within the profession. That community of practice can be realized either through conferencing, networking events, generating and sharing ideas. It is out of this that innovation then becomes a reality rather than a pipe dream. And one of the critical aspects that we face in the public procurement space is how do you bring new talent? How do you bring up and retain the current talent? So the thought leadership can also drive aspects of mentorship and coaching programs to an extent that we are now able to attract even young people. Then they get inducted into public procurement space because they can see that it's not only buying, okay, but it's influencing and changing lives. Then advocating for good standing of the profession. Right now, I'm not clear if procurement is respected in public sector. I'm not clear in my mind if we have that respect that we so desire. It's all about perceptions. So the thought leadership can then work so hard to change these perceptions. I've often said, in many instances, procurement is still seen as a buying function. And the buying function, anyone can buy. So if anyone thinks anyone can buy, so what's peculiar about procurement? Hence, the thought leadership can start bringing these topics up and then upholding again the code of conduct. When you talk of procurement, what do people think about it? Do they think, oh, it's a bunch of corrupt individuals? Or they say, oh, okay, this is a bunch of professionally driven individuals. So that thought leadership is changing the perceptions to that. And by so doing, we actually adding value to the profession. Stakeholder engagement is key, so it means we need to, at a certain stage, identify who are these stakeholders that can actually help, and in the process, we shape this profession. A very interesting question when I was discussing with Sean is, how do we get to that stage where there is absorption of this profession? Now, education, training, and the continuing professional development then underpins the absorption part, because we are seen as knowledgeable, relevant, and informed individuals within the procurement space. And as a result, then we're moving away from just being buyers or just doing purchasing into strategic aspects of the procurement space. Then the question now, how do we translate our activities? How do we translate our functions in procurement so that they become relevant to the economy, they become relevant to the government, and we start seeing now strategic sourcing as a mechanism or as a tool translating to job creations, now articulating what Section 22 of the Procurement Act is talking about, bring those aspects of beneficiation those aspects of industrialization. We'll never do it if we still have a buying approach, if we still have a purchasing approach, if we still have a three-court system. We borrowed the three-court system. No one knows what is a three-court system. What does it tell us in terms of good practice? I may get 3 quotations from the worst service providers, but I've got 3 quotations. I've cheated the system. That does not translate to good procurement practice. So these are some of the aspects that we are saying by underpinning thought leadership with education, training, and continuing professional development. It means we continually expose ourselves to what is best out there. We question, and then we come up with what we think is best practice. So at the end of the day, exposure then becomes key. Expose ourselves to what is best practice out there. Is it time to reinvent the wheel? Maybe not, but we can copy from others and panel it into our own environment. So with a strong education, training, and continual development, it then fosters that critical thinking that is critical in terms of absorption, making us acceptable and credible and influence in terms of what you call, because we are regarded as experts. Because if we are regarded as experts, it means our ideas then they are seen as authority at some stage. I think I've skipped one there. All right. Now,
just a quick one through this
leadership
one, Ron.
Within... Okay, Sean.
Just a quickly through this one. We're just watching time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this is what is happening within us, within the region, that is in South Africa and also in Africa. There are countries that are already looking at these aspects. I will not go through them, but you can see that countries like Rwanda, they're really leading in terms of e-procurement system. South Africa, there's something good that we are doing. I think we are one of the few countries in Africa that is a public procurement framework that defines what the procurement should do, and then our procurement is linked to socioeconomic development. Then Kenya, they're doing very well in that aspect in terms of their legal framework, and Ghana, they're also doing very well again in terms of capacity development for public procurement individuals. And Eswatini, they've got a lobby group, which is the Public Procurement Agency, that is driving advocacy and reforms. I think in a nutshell, we have something here that we can offer to the communities that will make sure that we are informed, relevant, and authentic. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, Ronald. Thank you very much. Folk, if you have not got the message yet, we actually have thought leaders on the panel today. So thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Ronald. Thank you, Ron Grace. And thank you, Professor Geo Quinot. Certainly one of the thought leaders that we have in South Africa and also recognized globally. Prof Geo is Professor of Law in Stellenbosch and is considered an expert in public procurement law. Prof, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Sean, and my apologies to you and our colleagues for joining late. I was in another meeting that I also had to now run out of, but as you all know, I love Sean's platform, our platform, as Sean always insists that we call it. And I always want to make sure that I can join whenever I can, and it's even a greater pleasure to join with old friends like Barbara. Hi, Barbara. Good evening.
Hi,
to you. And Ronald, of course, just around the corner. Hi, Ronald. Good to see you again.
Thanks, Prof. You want to share some thoughts on what is your thinking on what is thought leadership? And
yeah, thanks, Sean.
I don't know if you've got any slides, you're welcome to share, but otherwise you're welcome to just talk and give us some thoughts. And particularly in the context of Ron Grace's announcement up front that the NRF is committed to fund and develop a center of thought leadership. They haven't quite figured out the name yet, but it's going to be along those terms. Go ahead, Prof.
Thank you, Sean. Yes, and I don't have slides.
No problem.
I'm increasingly thinking that thought leadership these days involve not having slides. But let me not go there. Look, I think that for me, thought leadership is really about informing a particular area or a particular practice beyond just the standard operating procedure, just beyond just doing the work or fulfilling the function that the particular area is about. And let's frame it very specifically within the procurement context. I think thought leadership is about let's pause for a moment the practical, the concrete, the actual getting the work done, and let's think about why we're doing this and why we're doing it in the way that we're doing it. For me, thought leadership is really about that. It's about unpacking that. It's about trying to understand, make sense of what's going on. It's also, for me, about being reflective, about what is the contribution that I'm making? Why am I fulfilling this function within my immediate environment, but then also within a bigger system, within a bigger whole? Really making sense again, but at a very individual level about the contribution that I am making by what I'm doing. And I think thought leadership is about assisting all of us to do that and to continuously do that, to embed that within our daily actions. So for me, thought leadership is about all of that. I do think that, it's unfortunate that I think thought leadership has become one of those very nice, management speak kind of consultant words. You call yourself as a thought leader and that's what you do. I'm always kind of almost amused when on many of these social media platforms like LinkedIn or any of these X or any of these, you look at how a person describes themselves, and rather than saying this is what I do, they say I'm a thought leader. And then I think, okay, so, good. But why? Why do you claim you? And I'm not sure it's something that is just a self-proclaimed, when they ask you at school, what are you going to do? I'm going to be a thought leader, right? That's what I'm going to do for life. I'm not sure it works that way. I tend to be extremely critical of that kind of label because I do think it's been overused in, especially business circles, perhaps. I think it's something that you can only really kind of earn. And I think it does require a fairly consistent contribution within a particular area where you are consistently working and contributing in that area. I don't think one can really just be a thought leader in general, right? So whatever, I'm a thought leader on, braaiing, and I'm a thought leader on, I don't know, anything. I don't think it works that way. For me, it is something that you earn based on a fairly longer term, consistent involvement, really embedding yourself within the particular area, within the particular field. And then I think critically, embedding yourself within the community of that field. For me, those two things go hand in hand. I'm not sure that you can really call yourself a thought leader if you're only sitting on your own in a little office somewhere, viewing this thing from afar and just kind of sharing all these wisdoms from high up the mountain. You may then be a god in this field, but I'm not sure that you're a thought leader. For me, thought leadership is really about embeddedness. It's about being involved, not necessarily in the practice. That's not what I mean. So I don't subscribe to the fact that you need to be actually a buyer to be a thought leader in procurement. I often say, and please, I'm not suggesting that I'm a thought leader. I don't like labels very much, but I've never been a procurement official ever in my entire life. I always joke and say that my university tried to keep me away from their own SCM function as far as they possibly can, because I make their lives very difficult. So I ask the difficult questions. Why are you not doing it this way? That seems to be a very inefficient way of doing it. Why do we have not sustainability criteria? So they don't like me in that office. And yet I do think that I'm somebody who can add something to the public procurement community of practice based on something else. So I don't think you have to actually do the physical work, but what I do strongly believe in, and this is perhaps a critique of many academics, is that you cannot just sit on the sideline. You cannot remove yourself from that community and think that you can be a thought leader. You can be an expert, without a doubt. You can work out the technical aspects, but I'm not sure you can really be a thought leader. And I think if that's the brand of academic citizenship or academic role that you prefer, I think you need to ask yourself some serious questions about impact, because I'm not sure those two things really go together. For me, impact is about being embedded, being involved in the community, knowing the people, spending time with the people, making and creating the opportunities for community, being an active participant beyond just joining, beyond just being there, but also, leading in terms of bringing the community together, creating opportunities for the community to engage, but also then identifying what are those issues that the community should really be grappling with, and how do we frame that issues to enable the community of practice to grapple with it. And I think that is really what thought leadership is about. I also think it's about linking, building bridges. Ronald just made the point that one shouldn't be reinventing the wheel over and over again. That's just, one shouldn't do that. That's not smart. And I think thought leadership is also about that. I think thought leadership in a particular environment, in a particular context, is also about being involved in cross-cutting communities of practice, or cross-cutting circles of engagement and of expertise and of perhaps thought leadership, if you like, where you can, as a thought leader, draw those experiences into your own context, do that kind of translation, bring the learning and the experience from elsewhere into your group, open your own group to experiences elsewhere, so that you help your own immediate community of practice to grow and to see, but there are other ways of doing it. Often I find that for me, the thought leaders that are most effective in influencing me are those that are able to show me that kind of established ways of being and thinking, things that I just take as obvious and natural, are not obvious and natural, that they are created, that they are products of legacy or system or whatever. They're artificial, and that one does have the opportunity to change them, to revisit them. I think somebody who can move me to realize that in relation to something that I've always just assumed, I think is approaching what I would consider to be a thought leader. So things like open in our context, tendering. Is that still what we want to do? We strongly believe in it. Well, some of us at least. We assume, but is it so great? That's why I like, for example, bringing into the South African context many of our American colleagues, especially those involved in federal public procurement in America, where they work with a very different paradigm. For them, what they call just a closed tendering system is kind of, what? You do that for the bulk? Are you mad? How do you? And it challenged us to think differently. So for me, that's what it's all about. Perhaps saying a word or two about this whole idea of community of practice and embeddedness and the role I think that thought leaders should play there. I think it's a dual role. So I think thought leadership emerges from a community of practice. It's a product of a community of practice. So I think it's really being a member, an active member, a valued member of a community of practice, that you can start to think of yourself, or others start to think of you as a thought leader. So I think it's born out of the community of practice. But at the same time, you're not just a product of a community of practice. You are actually a custodian of that community of practice as well. You then carry the obligation, the moral obligation, if nothing else, to facilitate that community of practice, to grow the community of practice, to help steer the community of practice in the direction where current pressures are, or things that this particular community of practice is not yet seeing, but it's coming down the line. So AI is a great example at the moment, right? It's coming like this massive thing at us. We're all as confused about what it will be. It's new, it's fresh. But all communities of practice where it's going to have an influence, and it's difficult to think of a community of practice where it will not have an influence. Procurement is certainly one where it already has a massive influence, but it's just going to be exponentially more going forward. I think thought leaders in public procurement around the world should be assisting their own communities of practice, and then between communities of practice, all of us in grappling with this and understanding, where is this going? How do we position? Just what is the method? And I think that is the role also of a thought leader. I'm very, very happy to hear that we've got some movement institutionally in South Africa. I think it's long overdue. I mean, my views on this are well known. I do want to caution, however, that having an institutional home or an institutional focus is important, but it's not it. It's just, you know, as I've said a couple of times over the last few years in South Africa with our law reform, if we think that writing a new statute is the reform of our procurement system, then I want to cry, because that is such a misconception. The law is just the tool that can put us on the road towards the reform of our procurement system. The law is not the reform. And I would say the same of an institutional base for thought leadership. The base itself cannot be the thought leadership. It can just be the tool, the platform, the facilitation thereof. And I think as long as we view it in those terms, it's I think, a great development, because it does create the kind of on the ground, practical, concrete opportunities that one would need to make a lot of these things that I'm talking about a reality.
Very good. Thank you, Prof. I'm going to open the floor now to some comments and questions, but just to get us going, Mlalazi has put something interesting in the chat, and Michael has also raised it, and that's the whole political dynamic that exists. And I recall Angelo, Syce, who's online, saying that you know, he was suggesting for one of the particular transactions that they use two-stage bidding, and he got massive pushback because it wasn't quite acceptable. And could it? What are your thoughts around? And let's start with Barbara. What you've seen, Barbara, around the resistance often to thought leadership because of where we are, because we have politicians and we have government around us. So we'll ask Barbara, and we'll go to Prof here.
Yeah, interesting discussion. I mean, the politics is never going to go away, right? When I started looking at public procurement many moons ago now, the politics was part of the interesting overlay to it all. It's part of our system. It's part of our reality. It's different in different places. It's more or less difficult in different places, but it's always difficult, and it's always feels like a barrier. It always feels like we're being pushed around, and the policies come and go and change and get canceled and so on and so forth. So we can't let that stop us. So it's a matter of this notion of, I brought it up and Geo brought it up as well, the bridging in the times where the politics is stronger or less. And I think this is what thought leaders are doing, but all of us across the globe really who are passionate about procurement, we know how to get things done. People know how to innovate in and around the rules, the laws, not to break them per se. It's how do we get things done within the construct that's set up, and it's always going to be there, and it can be extremely frustrating. And I have lived in countries where it's maybe not quite as difficult as some others, perhaps. But it's a reality. It's fundamental to buying. It's there for a reason.
Yeah.
And I think it behooves us to get good at working what we know.
Thank you, Prof Geo Quinot.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree with Barbara. I mean, I think for me, the politics, even though I fully understand it's frustrating, and I've been working on this law reform, and the politics is massive, and it frustrates me, no end. I mean, sitting through those parliamentary committee meetings were some of the most frustrating and difficult experiences I've had in the last 10 years. But I think we need to remind ourselves that it's also why this is an interesting and fascinating field. Otherwise, we're just contractors, right? There's very little then difference, and it goes back to. For me, it goes back to the very simple question: what is at the heart of public procurement? Why is it different from just supply chain management in the private sector? And the difference lies in the public interest or the public function, right? That's the heart of it. We're not buying just because we want to not have a nice car. We're buying because we want to be able to get to the person that's trapped somewhere with that car. And I think that lies at the heart of it. And we cannot think about public function or public purpose without thinking about politics, because how would we even know what that is? And good or bad, we can have long conversations, and these days it's becoming even more difficult to have these conversations given what's going on around the world. But we do have political systems in each of our countries that's really just a way for us to kind of articulate or identify what are the public interest purposes that particular society wants to pursue. That's the mechanism. And we, as those working then with the tool, need to acknowledge that. That's our role. Our role is to take that public function and public purpose and to make it a reality. And we get that from the political system. So I think working with politicians, working with the political and translating that beyond the rhetoric, because that's the difficulty, of course, right? Politicians operate in rhetoric. It's their stock in trade. It's their language. But of course, in that rhetoric lies the public purpose and public function. And we need to be attuned to hear that and to be able to translate it and to be able to say to a politician, okay, you've said all these wonderful, really rowdy things, but what I'm hearing is that you want to do job creation, or you want to do this, or you want to do that. Let me assist you in understanding how this particular tool within your policy toolkit can assist you to get there. And I'm going to help you. And it's a hard, for thought leadership, I think it's a hard one, because I think thought leaders need to walk a very careful line between being patronizing, which does not work with politicians at all, probably the worst thing you can do, but being an educator. Educating that politician, taking the, because look, there's no reason to believe. Think of yourself before you came into the public procurement world. What do you know about public procurement? I didn't know anything, right? So there's no reason to believe that a member of parliament will have any clue about what we're talking about. So it's our job to assist them to get there. I think that's where it does help. To be somewhat at a distance. I think academics there has got a very strong position. I think it's one of the things that we can bring to society. We don't have skin in the game. We are slightly removed from that, both the political arena, but also the administrative, right? We're not in that department. We don't have to cover for our jobs there. Those are realities for the people in the system. We are somewhat outside it. So I think academics as thought leaders then got a nice position, but you need to take that up. Again, it's back to that idea that you've got a moral obligation to then play that role. I often say, and again, I'm not suggesting that I'm a thought leader, but I often say to colleagues, allow us, just ask us to facilitate a meeting or a workshop or a seminar, because I can do that from a university academic perspective, bring everyone to the table, because I'm not perceived to have a particular policy view that I want to push or whatever. That's difficult to do if you're in a government department or you're a trade association or you're a politician.
Right.
So I think that's an important thing to do. The one quick additional thing I will say is that I do think in procurement, though, that one should sometimes also be quite overt in driving particular policy agendas. I think that there are things in each of our communities where one should be an advocate. One should say, look, or even an activist, to say, in this country, we're lagging behind. In South Africa, I think it is sustainability, proper sustainability in its full understanding. I don't think we are there yet. I think we're seriously lagging behind. And I think this is the kind of global issues that I think where, you go beyond just being the technical assistant, the advisor. You also start to push for a particular substantive policy position. And I think thought leaders should be doing that as well.
Very good, thank you. Ronald, you've raised your hand, and then we're gonna jump to the Western Cape Department of Health. Go ahead, Ronald.
No, thanks, Sean. I just want to probably comment briefly on what Prof Geo was saying there. I mentioned 3 terms earlier on, which is informed, relevant, and authentic. It's not surprising to me that these stakeholders that we are seeming to serve, they don't understand what we are doing. And because of that, we are not even investing time to understand what they are looking for. We are pushing one element of our job, and that makes us irrelevant in this space. 2 things that I just want us to think about. I'm not going to elaborate deeper on them. Colleagues of mine who are here, who are deep in procurement, do we buy to spend money, or we buy to impact lives? I will tell you, 99% of our decision-making processes is buy to spend money. We are buying because we want to comply. We are doing the things that we are doing because we want to comply. Now, here's a politician. The politician and other stakeholders, they don't care about this compliance. They want to impact lives. So at the end of the day, we are all shooting, but shooting in different directions. So from a thought leadership perspective, these are the things that we are saying. How do we bridge the gap? Like what Dr. Barbara said, how do we bridge the gap? How do we bring the other stakeholders to understand, to see what we see, and then we understand them and we see what they see, and then we come together. We spend money to impact lives. Then it means our procurement processes, they are socially driven rather than just worried about the Auditor General who come and pick, why didn't you spend the money? Thanks, Sean.
Good one, thanks Ronald. Talking about saving lives, Keen Scott, now I don't think that is Keen Scott that is there, certainly no relationship. But if I'm not mistaken, Department of Health in the Western Cape, welcome. Just give me a second, please. You can unmute now. They were unmuted, but can't hear you at the moment. Yes, we can. We can hear you now. Good morning. Welcome. Yes, we can. Go ahead.
I was trying to put my video on, but it's okay. So, colleagues, this is a very thought-provoking conversation that we're having at the moment.
Do you just want to tell us who you are?
Sure. Thank you.
I know who you are, but just go ahead.
Yeah. So, Sean, can we switch on my video?
Yes,
camera, and people can see me.
Yes, you can.
Can I do that now?
There we are.
Can everybody see me?
Just try it again.
Okay, I'm gonna try again.
There we are. Welcome.
Okay, can everybody see me? Okay.
Yes.
So Good morning, colleagues. I think this is quite an important discussion that we're having, thought-provoking, and it touches on the executive position of our SEM colleagues. The perception, how the discipline is perceived on executive level in the public sector, and also on this very important notion as to how we position our public procurement in the right milieu where it belongs. The reason why I say that is the following. There is a general perception and understanding out there that public procurement is difficult, it's complicated, it's messy, and it's a tactical thing. It is just what it is. You find on executive level that that public procurement is being viewed as only tactical and that is only to buy. However, the clear link between the outcomes and the strategy employed by the department is not fully embraced in the procurement fraternity. Because there's a link between what the strategy of the department and the strategy of government is and the outcomes. In our world, it's population outcomes. In infrastructure, it will be like population outcomes for relevant infrastructure, whatever the case may be. But that link between the strategy and the outcomes which we're trying to achieve is not necessarily viewed that it is part and parcel of public procurement. The reason why I'm making such a strong statement is that in the public sector, the start of procurement, which is our demand management phase, does not exist, except for a paper exercise. I had a conversation with my boss yesterday where I said, I'm not fazed by strategic purchasing as these different definitions floating around from the World Health Organization, from what our NT describes and all of that, because people are trying to term and coin certain terms, but it's a fluid concept that overlaps. And I'm not fazed by strategic purchasing as defined by the World Health Organization. The reason for me not being fazed at all by it is because it's an essential part of work that must be done and which falls squarely in the demand management function of the procurement system. So if the departmental strategy embraces the outcomes of the World Health Organization in what they term strategic purchasing, then it stands to reason that the procurement function is by its nature a strategic function and not necessarily a tactical one. And if that link can be strengthened, you talk to both the politicians, you talk to both departments, because ultimately we are not involved only in the tactical part. And that's my issue that I'm currently struggling with, to get that message across, because our strategy component is in a different directorate as it is in all departments in the whole of the country. But the strategy department should actually inform our demand management, which then determines how the decision on what to buy is then affected. Yes, we do have 80% of our procurement that's completely tactical. That's where digitization and all of those things can bring us easy wins, reduce risks, all of those things. but there's a 20% of serious procurement that should be linked to many other things that ties into what the public needs, and that can only come from the strategy space. But now we sit in government and you have a procurement function and you have a strategic function. There's no alignment, close working together with it. And I'm talking from being in practice on an executive level. And that's what I'm picking up. And so for us in the Western Cape Department of Health, we are very fortunate to have health intelligence, epidemiology teams, all of those things that's happening. And all of those aspects inform what the public health outcomes are that we are striving towards. But in that system, when we look at what demand management really is, that is the combining of our health intelligence, knowing what our business is, and then deciding which way and what to buy in order to get to population health outcomes over 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever the case may be. And it's that link, whichever department we're at, that's really lacking in our public system. We're good in buying pencils.
Yeah.
We're good in buying all the other day-to-day things that's needed, you know. And for those things, we can train many of our officials quite easily to do that properly within the prescripts and all of those things. But that internally, in my opinion, is something that we will have to bring to the fore in order to elevate both our profession and the value add of procurement in that conversation. Then the facilitation and those things become a given. But everybody knows demand management sections operate on paper-based stuff in practice for compliance, and not necessarily an integration of your demand management function with your strategic function of the department.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I don't answer this question now, but what are your thoughts on cross-sector bridges to facilitate thought leadership? So don't answer that now. I'm going to ask Prof Quinot to come in, and then I know Barbara's also got some thoughts. Go ahead, Prof.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, I mean, I think Kian's kind of contribution is a really very important and timely reminder of the kind of things that I think we should be, and now I'm talking very specifically about South Africa and where we are at this moment in really reimagining our entire public procurement system. And I'm so worried that we will end up just having technical conversations and not having these really substantive conversations, these meaningful and you know, what is the substantive contribution we're trying to make conversations, which I think are at the heart of what we should be talking about. But I mean, I think, you know, in that line, Professor Allan made a really important comment now on the chat when she reminded us of the fact that in the end, what we are talking about here is about outcomes for real people and real communities. It's not an abstraction. It's not a theoretical, just conceptual game we're playing. Right? We are here talking about real people and real communities. And to me, that is, Barbara, so powerful, because I think when I look at narratives, processes, even literature, scholarship, certainly law, I worry that we get obsessed and stuck in two places. And they are not unimportant. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that these two things are unimportant. They are important. I'm just not sure they're the heart. And that is, firstly, we're obsessed with the public finance management side of it. Right? That seems to be a complete obsession of ours, that we always want to view public procurement through a public finance management perspective. Now, as I said, don't get me wrong, it's an important part. I'm just not sure it's the defining characteristic. At the moment, it seems to me in South Africa that our processes, our conversations, our reforms are driven primarily, if not exclusively, through a public finance perspective. And I think that's the wrong perspective. I think that misses the point. Secondly, is this whole point about the business transaction at issue. And again, I think it's the tail wagging the dog. The business transaction, the relationship between the public buyer and the supplier is, in my view, the tool. That's the mechanism. That's not what procurement is about. It's the way in which we achieve our objective. But if you look at our conversations, at our law, at everything that we are doing, the vast bulk of it seems to be focusing and obsessed with that relationship between the buyer and the supplier, specifically the contractual nature of that interaction. And again, I think that misses the point. It even misses the point in the relationship between the supplier and the procuring institution, to now start to use our new terminology in South Africa. Because I think if we can manage to shift how we conceptualize that relationship back to the heart of procurement, which is the public function, which is the real person and the real community, as Professor Allan is reminding us. If we bring that also to the heart of the business transaction, and we approach our relationship with our supplier in that sense. So you are not a supplier just making money out of a business transaction. You are somebody that is contributing to the achievement of this public function for this individual and this community. That is what you're doing, right? That's the heart. That's the starting point.
Yeah.
I do believe that we then open up space for different conversations, different ways of doing, different ways of thinking about this field. And I do think that then we can start to move really forward. Let me just do this very quick shout out for the Procurement Act. It's not all bad. There's actually great parts in it. And one of the things that I think is quite good and that we should leverage in South Africa is that we need to note that the Act allows us now to take procurement out of the CFO function, right? It was hardwired institutionally into the CFO function in South Africa since the start of the PFMA days. The PPA opens the door. The PPA is not prescriptive in that regard. It allows us to take a substantive decision about where do we want to position this within a particular organization. I think that's an important opportunity. It creates the opportunity for every organization to ask that question. Where does procurement sit institutionally, most meaningfully in my context, given the role it plays in relation to our mandate, what we're trying to achieve? And I would suggest quite often that would not be the CFO function. And I think that is a practical but very important opening for us to revisit what procurement is doing in the system. Thanks, Sean.
Good one. Thanks, Prof. Prof. Allan, you've got some thoughts. And just for the record, Esme heads up the procurement supply chain function in the Department of Health in the Western Cape. Go ahead, Barbara. Over to you.
Oh, yeah.
Barbara?
Yep, sorry. Just to build on that, and I'll be really super quick. One of the ways that, and sort of the great revelations to me along the way was that when I got into the language of commissioning and then into the language of social investment. So commissioning, I don't know if you use that language in your environments, but it gets you out of the tactical procurement language into the language of health, social services, demand management, where you're looking at populations, where you're looking at outcomes. So I can put some links in, or we could take this off into another conversation. But it really changes the conversation, and it's with people who get that conversation. And then the other aspect of that, which is interestingly named,
Barbara, just give us a quick summary. Commissioning. Just for our context.
So it's it's taking a step back. So basically the first thing in a commissioning cycle is looking at your populations.
Yeah.
Looking at the outcomes that you want for your populations. So you see it in health sectors, you see it in social services. And it's just it's a slightly different way of looking at things. And procurement comes in later. Procurement is all those other activities. Once you've done the demand, you've understood your demand. So there's some really good stuff out there that I could share if you
great, thank you.
Want to go that route. Yeah.
Would love to. I interrupted you. We're going to share something else.
Oh, it was just it's the language also has moved into something called social investment, which government's on the right generally like very much, but it also gives us another language for looking at integrating outcomes and outcomes-based contracts. So
thank you.
I can send some stuff on if you want at some point.
Good one. Esme, do you want to respond to that? If not, we'll bring Maureen in.
Yeah, I think let's bring Maureen in. I think this is quite useful because it touches on so many elements, all talking to the same concept. And it would be great if we start putting our thoughts together in some form of model where all those different perspectives can find a useful place in the issue of thought leadership that we are looking into. Thank you so much. And sorry, I didn't introduce myself. Thank you, Claude, Sean, for doing that. It's Esme from Western Cape Health. Yeah.
Thanks,
sorry.
Thanks very much.
Over to you. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Just quickly check. I lost her. Is she still got a question? There we go. Go ahead, Maureen.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Maureen Ware. I am responsible for contract management in the city of Cape Town. And just to just explain how the department I work in is structured, and it touches on Esme's point of that link with strategy, like strategic sourcing or linking the strategy so that when you're procuring, you're reaching your organizational objectives, you're delivering. So we are in a department or a directorate called Future Planning and Resilience, which seemed to me a bit fluffy. I'm a very tactical person. And we're quite far into the journey of linking our strategy, like Esme says, which should inform what we procure inevitably, specifically on the capital project and program portfolio side. Not so much OPEX yet, but so we've managed to make that link. And we've done it in a way through structures and systems and data, as Ronald indicated. But what I wanted to share with colleagues on the call, it is a very, very, very long journey. The project management journey in the city of Cape Town started in 2011, and the contract management journey only started in 2017. So in my game, we're 7 years into pursuing high levels of contract management maturity. So what has happened, and I just went through, it's a decade on my side and almost going on 2 decades on the project management side to get to that point where the organization and the leadership and the politicians are at a place where we can start talking to them about. We will start with strategy, which is a department in or a directorate, a department in the Directorate Future Planning and Resilience. So they are sister departments. So strategy is with us. And then there's my department, corporate project portfolio management, in one house.
Right.
So we've been able to make that link for the capital portfolio, and that informs the demand plan. So I'm contract management, which is done decentralized in the city of Cape Town, but the first part of the contract life cycle, which is procurement, is centralized. And only now, from a systems perspective, from a data perspective, can we prove to someone who wants to know that the project that's on the capital program came from the strategy. There's a lot of strategy documents. We're able to prioritize portfolio based on which projects are ready to go. And I just wanted to tell the fellow colleagues it's a long, long journey, because when I started, and this is my last point, and this is on that very heavy finance management, MFMA, AG pressure we're under. The first 3 years of my job were horrible because all the execs cared about was to make the audit findings go away. We couldn't even start the conversation around how do we do a proper demand plan based on strategy and delivery. It was years later when they calmed down and the audit findings calmed down that we could only start having those conversations. Like, please, can we now, pursue maturity improvement?
Right.
So it's a long journey. Thank you.
Well done, Maureen. And we see the evidence. Cape Town is leading in infrastructure development across the country. It's the biggest infrastructure spend of any metro. And yeah, so well done to you and your team for that. Thank you for sharing. Jeff Longwani, welcome, Jeff.
Hi, Sean. Good day, and thank you very much. Compliments, Esme, and the other colleagues. But thank you very much. Sean, yo, I'm saying yo, guys.
Yeah.
If you understand yo. And my yo, my saying, it is actually based on what? Thanks to Prof Allan and Prof Geo and Ronald as well, as Ron earlier on, in terms of I call this actually the transformation, the revolutioning, the procurement, supply chain management in the public sector.
Yeah.
And I thought today that I'm gonna just keep quiet and listen, to the experts, sharing with us. But what actually touches me is and I always argue about this, the strategic role of procurement. And I'm happy that Prof Geo has touched on that it should be taken out of the office of the CFOs. Wherever I go, when I engage, to say the CFO, Chief Financial Officer, that it does not need to be explained. The CFO is a banker. His role is looking at how much budget has been allocated, underspending, monitoring underspending and overspending, and advice. SCM traditionally, I think now with the Act and other reforms, we are moving away from the administrative, your norms and standard following the procedure, to more of a strategic role. And therefore, playing a strategic role is to also look at where is supply chain management or procurement actually located? And what are the skills and the competences that are required of whoever that will be driving the procurement agenda? For a sector department, for ESME here and health, that the approach in terms of actually planning, not just actually buying, because what we are doing is all about, when you put the procurement plans, it's all about buying where we are going to buy. It's about actually an inclusive participation on sustainable procurement. What does that mean? Who are the actually role players externally? Who are the manufacturers? Do we have the capacity in the health industry? Who are the suppliers of this? And who are the buyers? Who are the beneficiaries? And let's look actually at the long-term actually sustainability. And that it talks to what? The policy issues, the strategic plan of an organization. You go to education, you do the same. But I think what we need to move out from the generic, kind of an approach, we must actually have a sector-specific, procurement solution that will talk. Maybe it's another discussion, for another day. But I think what has actually been presented today is actually mouthful. But again, Ronald, going back on the issue of lag, which what Prof Geo has touched on, that we need actually, an institutional home. Institutional home, for procurement. And that it talks to the professional body for public sector. And that is the discussion. And I think, what I would like to mobilize and encourage everyone that here. And I think when we need, for me, it's a high priority that we need actually to set up, a team of experts that will engage at a higher level with the Minister of Finance, articulate, when you look at us as the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer, yes, we started well, having established that within the Treasury and so forth. But for it to be there, is it enough? Being in the Treasury as a division on its own, not being an independent, institution, what's going to happen is what we're going to see for the next 5 years is just going to be compliance, spending. But for me, what I'm vocal about, when we talk about the strategic role of CFO, of the SCM head in the department or institution, we must also have an independent procurement authority that will take us somewhere. Thank you for now.
Good one. Good one. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm gonna ask. Look, I think we could carry on for ages. This is such a good topic. I didn't think this would be
Sean,
interesting. Yes, yes, that. Go for it.
The last year, I didn't introduce myself. Sorry.
Jeff,
I've realized that is actually the norm. My apologies for that. Jeff Hlongwadi, formerly with the National Treasury. I am now on the other side, unemployed. Thank you.
Good one. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. Thank you. Let's start with Barbara and then Ronald and then Geo, and then I'm going to ask Ron, Grace, and or Angelo to come in right at the end just for some closing comments. Barbara?
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure to learn from all of you and have some interesting discussions. I think we mustn't let anyone talk procurement down. I think we have such a critical role to play from the very highest levels through all those things we know about that go on in procurement and supply chain management. And it's absolutely fundamental. Now, something we didn't talk about, and I'll only mention briefly, is data. And it's a struggle for all of us to get accurate data so that we can actually be informed and make good policy decisions off the back of the data. So that's something I think we need to take up a bit more. And without that, we're sort of running blind. So this is something that's got to, be part and parcel of all of our conversations going forward. And societal impact, always come back to that. Procurement is about people. It is about doing the best we possibly can with the money we've got at the time, thinking strategically as best we can, and just, being passionate and being really positive about it because it has such a positive role to play. So I'll just wrap that up. Thanks again for having me, and great to see old friends and make new ones as well.
Good one. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. And it's late on your side. It's going to be midnight soon if we don't stop. So thank you. Ronald, welcome. Some closing comments, Ron.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, thanks, colleagues. Yeah, my closing comments really are about the this thought leadership concept, being able to interrogate the following aspects. The first aspect, processes. Interrogate the processes. Are the processes yielding the results that we are looking for? That's the first thing. Then interrogate the systems. Are the systems in line with what we are expecting? And then interrogate the policies. Are the policies relevant and driving the desired outcomes? And interrogate the alignment, which actually what Prof said. Where do we place public procurement going forward, and how do we take that forward? And also interrogate the competencies, because in the absence of the competencies, we'll always find ourselves misplaced all the time. And then finally, interrogate relevance. Are we relevant? Or we are really pushing hard to be heard, but we are not relevant ourselves. We're pushing our own aspects of just buying to spend money rather than buying to impact lives. Because if we don't find ourselves being relevant, then obviously we become paper pushers eventually will become paper pushers, because those that feel we are not relevant, they will push papers to us and then they want us to complete the process. But I think we have a platform to ask difficult questions going forward. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Ronald. Prof Geo Quinot.
Thanks, Sean. I will really just, I agree with everything that my two colleagues have said. I want to just focus on one thing, and those that know me will not find this surprising, and that is the role of community. I think it's critical. I think it is, as I've said, I think it's definitive of anything like thought leadership. I don't think there can be thought leadership without community. I think in South Africa, if I'm very specific about our community and where we are in public procurement at the moment, I think we've got a nascent community of practice emerging. What I think we need is a bit of an anchor. And with that, I think what we need is, and we've started having this conversation, is we need to establish, and this is, Esme's also raised this, we need to establish a proper, let's say, body, and it can be whatever form, for ourselves, where we can have a bit of an anchor that can keep us together. So I think it is critically important, if we are going to take these kind of conversations and the developments that must flow from them forward, that we come together and create a proper professional body, professional association, whatever you want to call it. But following on what Ronald has also said, not a generic one, not one that is just, floating around and trying to be everything for everyone, quite specific, one that's focused on public procurement in South Africa. And I think it is critical that we take that step as soon as possible. And from there, I think one can really build then further initiatives and drive these conversations. So, my plea to our entire community of practice would be, let's commit ourselves to creating that. And it will require work and effort from a lot of us, above and beyond our day jobs. But if we are serious about this field, about this sector, about this function, then I think that's what we should be doing. And I hope that we can continue this conversation in South Africa, and rather sooner than later, establish that kind of anchor that I think we need. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Prof. Ron Grace, you kicked off with some announcements. Any closing comments from yourself? And then I'm going to ask Angelo to come in as well. And Angelo, if you could just repeat the key announcement for September. Go ahead, Ron.
Thanks, Sean. If we can change the order, I was standing in for Angelo in the one presentation. If I can just close after him.
Thanks, Angelo. Do you want to go ahead, Angelo?
Yes, good morning, everyone. Nice to see old faces again.
Good one. Welcome.
Yeah, so let me see if I can put the camera on. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so, thanks for the robust discussion on the topic. I think it's long overdue, because a lot of the colleagues, they live in fear and they're paralyzed by the processes that they currently have in their various fields that they're working in and organizations. So with this initiative that Ron and myself is trying to get off the ground, it will be an ideal platform for us to discuss any issues or problems or assistance that anyone may need. So I'm looking forward to more discussions on this. But thank you, Ron, for leading the presentation. And thanks all.
Thanks, Angela. Go ahead, Ron.
Thanks, Sean, for the opportunity to publicize the conferences and the guideline and the center. And I've left my email in the chat box for anybody's input in terms of who they feel should be an organizer or a speaker, or anything that can inform the best possible outcome in terms of best practices. Just in closing, I just want to highlight a comment here made, and I hope I understood it correctly. It was almost as if he was saying, why do we have tenders in public procurement? And for me, that type of question is the type of question that thought leaders ask, where you challenge the very foundations that people take as being, as being normal. Whereas the private sector, for example, may not regard tenders as being normal. And it stimulates such a wonderful discussion. So maybe at some stage, we can consider having a discussion on just provocative questions, just for the pure joy of intellectual stimulation. Thank you for that. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Angelo. Thank you, Barbara. Very late on your side. Thank you, Ronald. Thank you, Prof Geo. Thank you to all those that came in with the questions. Next week, I was planning to, and I'd invite some of the folk in the US to share with us what's happening there in the federal level from a procurement perspective. Based on today, maybe we push that out a little bit, but we'll confirm shortly what the topic is next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Sean.